This is how racism works in America. We're going to talk about two things that seem unrelated, but they are connected by the same thread. America has a tendency to weaponize narratives against communities that are marginalized. So I was reading The Red Record by Ida B. Wells, and in it she documents a lynching, I think in chapter 3. In the lynching, a child had died, and by all appearances, it seemed that the child had died by strangulation. Now, the child's father was a police officer, a sheriff, some type of law enforcement inside that community, and he was known to have something of a temper and to be prone to violence, and so much so that he believed that the reason why his daughter was killed was because of the people who he had committed some type of violence against was effectively seeking revenge. Now, statistically speaking, more than likely, somebody in her family did it. But the father already started the narrative rolling when he said, no, it must have been somebody that I hurt who came to hurt my child. Story keeps going. Eventually, one of the preachers in the church gets on the stage and says that the child was torn limb from limb, torn asunder. Just all types of inflammatory language. And in doing so, they created an entire monster out of thin air. But the thing is, if you create a monster, you gotta slay the monster, because you can't have a monster running around your community. Enter into it a black man. This is a man who was in a community, who had some type of mental incapacity, possibly autistic, but he was a person who would work inside white people's homes, but he was prone to have outbursts and behavioral issues. Well, he was the perfect person to put all this at the feet of. So they took a tragedy of this child dying, they exaggerated to grandiose proportions, created a fiction about this man doing horrible, unspeakable things to the child, and then used all of that to manufacture a rage inside the community. I mean, people came from outside of town, from different parts of the state, to watch this man be lynched, to watch these people do some heinous things, wretched things to this man. Typically, when they wanted to destroy black people or destroy a black community, they would just walk in there, burn everything to the ground, and kill a bunch of people, and that would be it. But they can't do that anymore, because there's cameras everywhere. And the video might get out. So they don't want to explain anything. They need other mechanisms by which to destroy communities. Enter Minnesota and the Somali community there. Random white kid on the internet by the name of Nick Shirley gets everybody into a tizzy because he supposedly uncovers some fraud scheme. Herein lies the problem. The FBI had already uncovered it about 3 years ago. September 21st, 2022, dozens charged in $250 million COVID fraud scheme. FBI investigation alleges massive misuse of money meant to feed children during a pandemic. The scheme was called Feeding Our Future. So the investigation started on the Biden administration. Some people were indicted, some people have gone to jail. So Nick Shirley was bouncing around to different daycares, knocking on doors, and some of these daycares were no longer in existence. And he would lament, why are these daycares that are getting funding no longer here? Well, genius, it's probably because the people who had committed the fraud were already in jail and the businesses were shut down. But, you know, don't let the truth get in the way of the lie that you want to tell. And Tim Walz writes something basically talking about how they have been spending years cracking down on fraudsters. And ultimately that this is bullshit and part of Trump's long game. He's right, but anyway. Tim Walz is working inside of his state to deal with fraud. And honestly, every state has to deal with fraud. Even states like Florida, where Rick Scott committed Medicare fraud. Rick Scott was CEO of a company called HCA. And in 2003, the DOJ hit a record settlement of $1.7 billion. What do you think white people did to Rick Scott? White people made Rick Scott a senator. Trump commits fraud, he becomes president. Trump pardons people who commit fraud. This is Paul Walzak. Paul Walzak, also from Florida, owned a nursing home, and as the owner of the nursing home, he stole $7 million from the staff's paychecks. He was found guilty, ordered to serve only 18 months in prison, and also had to pay a restitution of $4.4 million. His mama, Elizabeth Fago, took her punk ass up to Mar-a-Lago to Trump, and a couple days later, her baby boy gets a pardon. And as a result of getting a pardon, Paul no longer has to pay the $4.4 million in restitution that he stole from those people. This is white politics, by the way. White commit fraud? Cool. Non-white commit fraud? We gotta destroy you. So this is what the white kid does. Goes around harassing daycares, harassing the community. He gets all of the angry racists who can't read very well, angry and agitated, and they want someone punished. Trump sees an opportunity. Now, normally they would just walk into the community and burn everything to the ground, but it's not the 1800s, early 1900s. So we got to be more surgical with it. What does Trump do? Seizes an opportunity. Target the Somali community with his anti-immigrant propaganda, and he also gets to target one of the Democrats in Tim Walz. And he uses the power of the federal government, because this is indeed a dictatorship, to freeze funding to the entire state of Minnesota. Even the Republicans who voted for Trump in Minnesota, who are beneficiaries of the system, no longer have access to the funding because Trump has frozen that funding. But I'm sure they're okay with it because, you know, punish the non-whites. But this is what racism looks like in America. From Ida B. Wells until now, playbook hasn't changed. Create or exaggerate a narrative, use it to incite rage, and then weaponize institutions and people to target and destroy certain communities. No more fires and lynchings, although the lynchings have still been occurring. But now we're going to use the federal agencies and the government to do our bidding. And to the average white racist, this is justice for them. I mean, ever since the 60s and the civil rights era, y'all have been using the power of the federal government to target them so they wouldn't be discriminatory and bigots. And they hated that shit. So now they get to target you. This is your white supremacist dictatorship. Welcome.